Melissa Walker was checking her work emails while drinking her morning coffee. She worked as a chief accountant at a small accounting firm in Cleveland, Ohio. The morning sun streaming through the window illuminated her slightly tired face. The shelves in the room were lined with photos of her and her 8-year-old son, Michael. "Michael, time to get up. You'll be late for school." She called out toward the hallway, but there was no response. That's right, Michael was at her parents' house now. Melissa placed her hand on her large belly and thought about the baby that would soon be born. The due date was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks ago, Melissa had shown signs of premature labor, and her doctor had prescribed complete bed rest. It was impossible to rest while taking care of an 8-year-old son by herself. Her ex-husband Thomas had moved to another state after their divorce 3 years ago, and she couldn't expect him to help on a daily basis. "Mom, thank you so much for looking after Michael for a while." Melissa expressed her gratitude to her mother Judith over the phone. Her parents lived in the suburbs of Cleveland and were happy to take care of their grandson Michael. However, she had noticed subtle changes in her parents recently. Her mother in particular seemed less warm than before and appeared to be rushed, as if chased by something. "Don't worry. You just think about the baby. Leave Michael to us." Judith's voice was cheerful, but Melissa was concerned about the sound of slot machines in the background. "Mom, are you at the casino again?" "It's just entertainment, don't worry. Your father and I go once a week. It helps relieve stress." Melissa felt anxious but had no choice but to trust her parents. Since childhood, her parents, especially her father Lawrence, had been meticulous and responsible people. He had worked at a bank for 40 years and led a steady life. Even after retirement, he actively participated in community volunteer activities. Her mother Judith, a former elementary school teacher, was a warm and caring person. The fact that her parents had started going to the casino more frequently than their once-a-week routine might have been triggered by her father being laid off last year. Still, Melissa thought they would surely take good care of Michael. On the day her labor started earlier than expected, Melissa hurriedly called an ambulance. After arriving at the hospital, she called her parents. "Mom, I've gone into labor. I just got to the hospital." "Oh my. With still 3 weeks to go. Are you all right?" "The doctor says they're going to do an emergency C-section right away. Tell Michael that Mommy will see the baby soon." "I understand. Don't worry. We'll take care of Michael." That night, Melissa gave birth to a little girl. She named her Emma. However, she developed complications after delivery and had to stay in the hospital longer than planned. "Can I talk to Michael?" Melissa called from her hospital room every day. For the first few days, she was able to enjoy short conversations with Michael. Hearing her son's voice was a great encouragement for her recovery. "Mommy, I played guitar with Grandpa. And Grandma's cookies were so delicious." Michael sounded fine. However, after about a week, it became more difficult to get in touch with her parents. The times when they didn't answer the phone increased, and even when they did, the noisy music of a casino was always playing in the background. "Mom, where's Michael?" "He's out playing with friends right now. I'll have him call you back when he returns." However, those later calls often never came. Melissa's anxiety grew day by day. On the 10th day, the doctor finally gave her permission to leave the hospital. Melissa held baby Emma in her arms and left the hospital room, accompanied by the nurses. She called her parents several times, but no one answered. "Michael." She felt her chest tighten with anxiety. She called a taxi and decided to head to her home first. Maybe her parents had brought Michael there and were waiting for her. Hoping so, she hugged her newborn daughter. Melissa got out of the taxi, and while holding baby Emma, she headed for the front door of her home. When she unlocked the door and entered, She immediately noticed there was no one there. Silence greeted her, and anxiety spread through her chest. Michael? Mom? Dad? Her voice just echoed in the empty house. She hastily looked around the living room, but there was no sign that Michael had been staying there. She quickly took out her cell phone and dialed her parents' number again. The phone kept ringing, but there was no answer. What on earth is going on? Feeling her heart pounding, Melissa got back into the taxi with the baby and headed to her parents' house. 20 minutes later, she was standing in front of Lawrence and Judith's house. I've arrived at my parents' house, but something seems strange. She rang the doorbell several times while holding the baby with one hand, but there was no response. There are flyers piling up in the mailbox, and the newspaper hasn't been taken in. Melissa frowned as she looked at the mailbox on the porch. Usually, her father had a habit of bringing in the newspaper every morning. She walked around the house and tried to peek through the windows, but the curtains were drawn, and she couldn't see inside well. Growing increasingly anxious, she decided to go around to the backyard. The once beautifully maintained garden was now overgrown with weeds. The rose bushes her father had been so proud of were wilting, perhaps from lack of water. It looks like nobody has taken care of this place for days. Melissa knocked on the back door and called out. Dad? Mom? Michael? Is anyone there? But there was no reply. The air felt cold, and she pulled the baby closer to her chest. Emma looked up at her mother with curious eyes. The front door was locked, and it seemed no one was inside. Her anxiety was turning into fear. Suddenly, she heard a small noise from the backyard. Melissa walked carefully toward the sound. In the back of the yard was an old wooden shed. Melissa looked at the shed, and memories came back to her. That shed, that's where Dad used to keep his pet pig, isn't it? When she was a teenager, her father had kept a miniature Vietnamese pot-bellied pig as a hobby. However, the pig had died several years ago, and the shed had hardly been used since. Melissa approached the shed and called out, "Is anyone there? Michael?" A faint sobbing sound came from the shed. Melissa felt her heart stop for a moment. She held the baby tight with one arm and ran to the shed. The rusty door was slightly open. She pried it open and looked inside. In the darkness, her eyes caught sight of her son. Michael was sitting on the dirty floor, holding pig feed in his hands and trembling. His clothes were dirty, his hair was disheveled, and his face showed clear traces of tears. When he noticed his mother, he looked up in surprise. "Michael! What are you doing?" Michael turned around in surprise, and when he saw his mom, tears welled up. "Mommy! I'm hungry. Grandpa and Grandma haven't come back for days." There was nothing in the refrigerator. Melissa rushed to her trembling son and hugged him. The boy's small body was cold and shaking. "How long have you been here? Where did Grandpa and Grandma go?" Michael answered while sobbing, 3 days ago. Grandma said, "We're going out for a bit," but they didn't come back. They don't answer the phone. I was scared." Melissa was speechless at her son's words. 3 days. Her 8-year-old son had been left alone for 3 days. "You've been here alone. What about food?" "There was some in the refrigerator at first, but it ran out. I was so hungry, there was pig feed here." Melissa stared at her son's face. Michael's cheeks were sunken, and there were dark shadows under his eyes. He was clearly malnourished and frightened. Anger welled up inside Melissa. What on earth were her parents thinking? She held her newborn baby in one arm and embraced her son with the other. "It's okay now, Michael. Mommy's here." Enraged, Melissa took Michael's hand and headed for her parents' house. She told her son to wait in the backyard, then forced open a window and entered the house. The inside of the house was in a worse state than she had imagined. Food scraps, empty alcohol bottles, and numerous lottery tickets and casino receipts were scattered about. It was unbelievable that this was the house of her meticulous parents. Melissa called her parents' cell phones several times with trembling hands. On the fifth attempt, her mother finally answered. "Hello?" Judith's voice was cheerful, with the noisy sounds of a casino in the background. "Melissa? I'm busy right now, let's talk later." Melissa's anger exploded. "I found Michael eating pig feed in the pig pen. What's going on?" After a brief silence, Judith responded, "You're exaggerating. There should have been food in the refrigerator. Don't bother me. I'm on a roll right now. The refrigerator is empty. Michael has been left alone for days." Melissa's voice trembled. "Not that long, probably a day or two." "Oh, the dealer is calling me. I'll call you back later." The call ended, and Melissa was at a loss for words. She was trembling with anger. The sense of responsibility, love for family, and trust that her parents had taught her since childhood, it all felt like it was crumbling away. She quickly took Michael back to her own house. As soon as they arrived, she gave him a warm bath and changed him into clean clothes. She took food from the refrigerator and made a simple meal. Michael ate hungrily, as if starved for a warm meal. After the meal, Melissa checked her son's body. Fortunately, there were no major injuries, but signs of mild dehydration and malnutrition were evident. "It's okay now, Michael. Mommy is with you. And here's Emma, your new sister. I'll never let you go through something like that again." Michael clung to his mother, finally feeling safe enough to break down in tears. Melissa held her son to her chest, stroking his small back, and vowed in her heart. She would fight to protect these children, no matter what. She didn't know what had happened to her parents, but for now, the safety of Michael and Emma was her top priority. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Melissa sat on the living room sofa and covered her face with both hands. Her parents, people she had respected, loved, and trusted, why had they done this? She would have to seek answers tomorrow, but tonight she was exhausted. After checking on the children's breathing, she finally allowed her tired body to rest. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the curtains, illuminating Melissa's face. She woke from her sleep, hoping for a moment that yesterday's events had been a nightmare. However, seeing Emma's small cries from the next room and Michael sleeping on the sofa, she remembered the reality. She slowly got up and went to Emma's room. Picking up the baby and nursing her, she organized what needed to be done today. First, she needed to contact Child Protective Services, then consult with a lawyer. While making breakfast, Melissa gently woke Michael. "Good morning, Michael. Did you sleep well?" Michael sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Yes, it's been a while since I slept at Mom's house." Melissa stroked her son's hair and put pancakes on a plate. "Let's take it easy today. You can go to school if you want, or you can stay home and rest." "I want to stay home," Michael said in a small voice. "Will Grandpa and Grandma come back?" Melissa answered, choosing her words carefully, "I don't know right now. But don't worry. Mommy will always be with you." After breakfast, Melissa called Child Protective Services. She explained the situation in detail and reported that Michael had been abandoned in a pig pen. A woman's voice on the other end of the phone responded quietly. "This sounds like a serious case. We'll send a caseworker today. How is your child's current condition?" "I administered first aid last night. He seems to have mild dehydration and malnutrition, but I don't think there's any major health damage." 2 hours later, Child Protective Services caseworker Carol Johnson visited the house. In her 50s, she had a warm smile and sharp eyes. After talking with Melissa, she also spoke kindly with Michael. Carol continued the conversation in Melissa's kitchen. This is clearly a case of child abandonment. How is Michael's health? Melissa responded while holding Emma. A pediatrician examined him. He has dehydration and mild malnutrition, but no major health issues. I'm more concerned about psychological trauma. Considering your child's condition, I think it would be good to refer him to a specialized counselor, Carol said, taking notes. Have you been able to contact your parents? I spoke with them briefly yesterday while they were at a casino, but they haven't answered their phones since. Carol said with a serious expression, in this case, we need to consider reporting this to the police. I also recommend applying for a temporary protection order. The safety of your children should be the top priority. Melissa nodded. She loved her parents, but the safety of Michael and Emma came first. I understand. Please tell me the necessary procedures. After Carol left, Melissa contacted her lawyer, Sarah Miller. Sarah was a trusted lawyer who had also helped during her divorce. She explained the situation and consulted about a temporary restraining order against her parents. Melissa, this is a serious situation. Child abandonment can become a criminal case. Sarah's voice conveyed her seriousness even over the phone. Also, we need to consider the possibility that your parents are having financial problems. Spending at casinos. I'm worried about whether Michael's assets are involved. Melissa gasped. What do you mean? Your parents were involved with Michael's trust fund, right? Yes, a $50,000 college education fund combining child support from my ex-husband and my savings. I thought my parents were more financially responsible than I was. Sarah exhaled deeply on the other end of the phone. We need to check on those funds. I'll investigate on my end. A few days later, Sarah called. Her voice was dark and heavy. I have bad news. Michael's trust fund was completely withdrawn 6 months ago. It was approved by your parents. Melissa collapsed into a chair. All $50,000. Why? Furthermore, 3 credit cards have been created in your parents' names, with debts totaling $150,000. Some of it is from casino cash advance services. Melissa was speechless. Her parents, who had always lectured her about financial responsibility, had betrayed her trust and used up funds meant for her grandson's future. I can't believe it, they always lectured me about money management. Sarah continued quietly, these are typical symptoms of gambling addiction, Melissa. Your parents are sick. However, that doesn't justify what they did. The next day, further investigation revealed that Lawrence and Judith had fallen into gambling addiction over the past 2 years and had accumulated debts. They had also used up Lawrence's retirement money. A foreclosure notice had already been delivered to their house. Melissa was confused and hurt. In her heart, feelings of anger and concern for her parents were mixed. But above all, protecting Michael was the top priority. She scheduled psychological counseling for her son and explained the situation to his school. In the evening, Melissa was preparing dinner. Michael was doing his homework, and Emma was sleeping in her crib. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, she saw her parents standing there, pale-faced and exhausted. Melissa hesitated for a moment but opened the door. Lawrence couldn't meet her eyes and stared at the floor. Melissa, please. Let us talk. Talk about what? About starving and abandoning your grandson? Or about stealing $50,000? Melissa's voice was cold. Judith said, crying, we need help. Melissa, despite trembling with anger, let them into the house. Michael had been left with a friend. Sitting face to face in the living room, Judith broke down in tears. We lost control of our gambling, we're being chased by debt collectors, our house is about to be foreclosed. Lawrence covered his face with both hands, his shoulders shaking. I'm so sorry about Michael. We only intended to go to the casino for a little while. But once we sit down, we can't get up, we lose track of time. And when we lose, we try to win it back by betting more. Judith said, barely getting the words out. We did leave food for Michael. But to not come back for 3 days, what have I done? Melissa listened to her parents' confession, torn between confusion and anger. She stood up and said in a trembling voice, I can't believe it. You are my parents. How could you? Lawrence said, looking down, it started after I was laid off. I went to the casino with my retirement money, and I won at first. I couldn't forget that thrill. And when we started losing, we tried to get it back. Judith continued. Melissa trembled with intense anger. What happened to Michael's education fund? Her parents were silent. Lawrence said in a small voice, we used it all, we were planning to get it back. Melissa angrily threw her parents out of the room. Get out right now. Do you understand how scared Michael was? He's only 8 years old. You left your own grandson starving in a pig pen, and you say, that wasn't our intention. Lawrence extended a trembling hand. Melissa, please. Let's talk. Talk. Where were you all this time? While I was in the hospital, you abandoned your grandson and went to the casino. You're not my parents anymore. Stay away from us. Judith broke down crying, and Lawrence left with slumped shoulders. Afterward, Melissa consulted with her lawyer and applied for a temporary restraining order against her parents. At the same time, she was told by the Child Protective Services caseworker that this was a serious case of child abandonment and that criminal charges might be filed. A few weeks later, just before notification from the court arrived, Lawrence visited Melissa's workplace. He was thinner than before, with deep traces of fatigue on his face. Daughter, please. We were completely wrong. Judith and I have been participating in a gambling addiction treatment program since last week. We know we don't deserve to see you or Michael. But. He held out a letter with trembling hands. It was an apology letter from Judith and a certificate of treatment participation from a local addiction counselor. Melissa accepted the letter, but her expression remained stern. Despite being torn by complex emotions, she wouldn't forgive them so easily. Getting treatment is the least you should do. But trust, once lost, is not easily regained. The wounds that Michael and I have received aren't going to heal so easily. Lawrence nodded and said as he left. I understand. We intend to prove ourselves over time. We don't want to lose you. Melissa would temporarily suspend legal action, but she felt there was still a long road ahead to repair the relationship with her parents. She held Judith's letter to her chest and gazed out the window. When she got home, Michael had just returned from school. He was gradually regaining his energy, but he still sometimes woke up from nightmares. Mom, did you have a good day at school? Melissa smiled at her son. Michael thought for a moment before answering, yes, but everyone asked me about Grandpa and Grandma. Melissa sat next to her son and put her arm around him. What did you tell them? I said Grandpa and Grandma are sick, and I can't see them for a while, Michael answered with a serious expression. Melissa stroked her son's head. That's right. Grandpa and Grandma are getting help right now. Will I see them again? There was a light of hope in Michael's eyes. Melissa exhaled deeply. Someday, for sure. But for now, let's do our best, the three of us, with Mommy and your sister. That night, after Michael had gone to bed, Melissa opened Judith's letter. In it, her mother had written words of deep regret and apology in trembling handwriting. My father, your grandfather, suffered from the same illness. He died leaving the family with huge debts. I had vowed not to repeat the same mistake, but I ended up following the same path. I want to break this chain of illness that spans generations right here. Melissa held the letter to her chest and cried. It was a complex mix of emotions, anger and sadness, along with a faint hope. 6 months had passed. In the warm spring sunshine streaming through the window, Melissa sat on the living room sofa, looking at the documents in her hand. It was the latest progress report from her parents' addiction counselor. During these 6 months, Melissa had learned much about her parents' gambling addiction and had joined a local gambling addiction family support group. Michael was receiving psychological counseling and was gradually recovering from his trauma. Emma was growing healthily and could already roll over, and recently she had started sitting up. As Melissa was reading the report, she received a call from the support group leader, Betty. "Melissa, are you coming to today's meeting?" Betty's warm voice came through the phone. "Yes, I plan to." After Michael's school, Melissa responded, marking her calendar. "Your parents' story is inspiring everyone. Especially the recent report that shows signs of recovery." Melissa looked out the window and took a deep breath. "They do seem to be really trying. But addiction is a disease, Melissa." Betty's voice was kind. "Your parents certainly did wrong, but they are suffering too." "I know. But it's hard to forgive them, especially when I see Michael still waking up from nightmares." "Forgiveness doesn't mean condoning their actions. It's about freeing yourself," Betty said quietly. "For your sake, and for Michael's." After hanging up, Melissa thought deeply. Her parents were indeed trying to change. They had set up a debt repayment plan, moved to a small apartment, and were seriously committed to treatment. Her father had started a part-time job at a local supermarket, and her mother had begun volunteering at an addiction support group. During this time, Melissa received a call from Michael's teacher. Michael had been crying at school, saying he wanted to see his grandparents. He was drawing a picture of his family during class, the teacher explained. His grandparents were included in the picture. He seems to want to see them. That night, Melissa talked with Michael. "Do you want to see Grandpa and Grandma?" she asked gently. Michael nodded. "Yes. I was scared, but I wondered if Grandpa and Grandma forgot about me." Melissa hugged her son. "They haven't forgotten you. They were just confused because of their illness. It seems they're getting better now." After consulting with the counselor, she decided to allow a short, supervised visit. The meeting would take place at the counselor's office, a neutral location. On the day of the visit, Michael was nervous but looking forward to seeing his grandparents. Lawrence and Judith had completed a 6-month gambling addiction treatment program and were regularly attending support groups. When they arrived at the counselor's office, Melissa had a brief conversation with her parents. "Melissa, thank you for this opportunity. To be able to see Michael." Tears shone in Judith's eyes. "This is what Michael wanted. I'm just respecting his feelings." Melissa's voice was calm. "We've been going to treatment every day for 6 months. We're slowly repaying our debts." Lawrence said, looking at the floor. "Let's not talk about the past today. I came only for Michael." The meeting between Michael and his grandparents was touching. Judith burst into tears upon seeing her grandson, and although hesitant at first, Michael hugged his grandparents. They talked quietly about Michael's school events and Emma's growth. As Melissa watched the meeting, complex emotions swirled in her heart. The anger at not being able to forgive her parents' mistakes conflicted with the desire to repair family bonds. After leaving the counselor's office, Melissa opened a family album at home. It contained photos of the family from happier times. One photo caught her eye. It was a picture of her at age 12, riding a boat on a lake with her parents. The words from Judith's letter came to mind. "My father, your grandfather, suffered from the same illness." Melissa began to view her parents' actions from a different perspective for the first time. Even if she couldn't forgive their actions, Perhaps she could deepen her understanding of gambling addiction as a disease and its impact on families. A few months later, Melissa decided to invite her parents to a family therapy session. The purpose of this session was to create a safe space where all three could express their feelings and heal from past wounds. That day, when I found Michael in the pigpen, something broke inside me. I couldn't trust you anymore as my parents, Melissa confessed quietly. Judith responded while wiping away tears, we can't make excuses. Addiction is a disease, but we made the choices. Every day, we regret those decisions. Lawrence looked straight into his daughter's eyes. We will never make the same mistake again. We want to show that through our actions. Melissa exhaled deeply. It may take time to fully forgive. But I want to move forward one step at a time as a family. A year later, Melissa's family was gradually walking the path of healing. Lawrence and Judith had recovered from their gambling addiction and were volunteering at the local senior center, supporting elderly people struggling with addiction. To make amends for the harm they had caused Michael, they established a new education fund for him, saving a small amount each month. Melissa herself had become a leader in the addiction family support group, using her experiences to help other families. She hadn't completely forgiven her parents, but she was gradually regaining trust. Michael and his sister Emma were growing up healthy, and their relationship with their grandparents was slowly being repaired. Sometimes on weekends, they would have dinner together at her parents' new apartment. That day, the sight of Michael in the pigpen had been a symbol of the family's crisis. But now, it served as a memory of the difficulties they had overcome, becoming the foundation for building a stronger family relationship. Melissa now understands. The path to family recovery is never linear, it's a process of repeated setbacks and progress. And most importantly, it's about having the courage to acknowledge past mistakes, face them responsibly, and walk step by step toward the future. One summer day, while having a picnic in the park, watching Michael running around and Emma rolling on the grass, Melissa asked Lawrence, "How did you manage to recover from that day?" Lawrence answered while looking at his grandchildren, "When I almost lost Michael, I finally realized what I was doing. Addiction doesn't just destroy yourself. It hurts the ones you love. That was the most unbearable part." Melissa nodded quietly. The wounds remained, but she had learned to live with them. And above all, she felt that she had learned much from this painful experience and had become stronger. Family isn't perfect, but they can learn, grow, and sometimes hurt each other, yet reconnect through love and forgiveness.